Isreal, now an adult, was still hoping to mend his fractured relationship with his father. John Jeffrey, for his part, seemed somewhat receptive. The land he and his wife purchased to build on was instead handed to Isreal. Before long, Isreal had built a cabin near the Canadian border and lived there alone when he was not helping the family. When his parents announced that they were moving yet again, this time to Smyrna, Maine, to join the Amish population, Isreal decided to stay put. He liked the life he had made for himself here, and he was no longer willing to uproot his life the next time his parents switched faiths. The rest of the Keyes never did officially join the Amish faith. Instead, they stayed constantly at the periphery of Amish life, attending church services and partaking in the local industry of producing maple syrup. The family was already used to living off the land with minimal modern technology, so the exact reason that they never fully integrated is unclear. However, it is assumed it was because of Heidi, who was drawn to high-control religions, but then quickly grew bored of them, lost interest in the Amish way of life before they could. It is unsurprising that Isreal, who craved stability, had finally had enough. Despite having a subpar homeschool education, Isreal had always been sharp. He was quick to learn new skills and seemed capable of teaching himself just about anything. While alone in New York, he took a few school courses and received his GED. It was a necessary step for his next plan. Isreal may not have hated his parents, but he did feel a great deal of resentment towards the beliefs he was raised with. Rejecting God and becoming an atheist was one form of rebellion. Now that he was on his own and had some freedom, he sought out a way to rebel against his family's anti-government beliefs. So he turned to where so many other desperate young people turn. He wanted to join the army. It was, in retrospect, a bit of a strange decision, as Isreal himself was never fond of the United States government either. At that time in his life, however, it made sense. His childhood had made him tough and resourceful, determined to make it on his own. Sure, he was fully capable of surviving while living off the grid, in the woods, in a small town, but now he wanted more out of life. He wanted to see the world. But there was another issue. I didn't exist on paper, Isreal later explained. It was true. Given his parents' distrust of hospitals, he had likely been a home birth, and thus not reported to any authorities. He had no birth certificate or social security card, both of which are needed to join the United States Army. Did Isreal go through all the trouble of getting these documents himself, or did he somehow manage to get into the Army without them? Either way, traveling to New Jersey and then joining the Army signified the start of his official existence. He officially enlisted in the summer of 1998 and was stationed at Fort Hood, Texas, and later at Fort Lewis, an Army base to the south of Tacoma, Washington. He became a specialist in Alpha Company, 1st Battalion, 5th Infantry. Much of his duties involved weaponry, manning mortars, and locating neutralized landmines, though he never actually saw combat. Isreal enjoyed Army life more than he had anticipated. After so many years of being a provider, it was a relief to have that pressure off him. Here he was just another soldier, someone who could blend into the crowd. It was also nice to have such a strict routine to stick to, something he had missed for much of his life up to that point. For as well as he had adapted to the structure of the military, Isreal still had his struggles. His parents had not been accepting of outsiders, so he seldom had a reason to interact with people who were different from him. It was a bit of a culture shock to meet so many new people from all walks of life, and while he never necessarily clashed with any of the other recruits, he had no idea how to make friends. It certainly did not help that Isreal was ignorant of almost all contemporary pop culture. He was said to have no hobbies other than hunting and reading gun magazines. In their downtime, his fellow soldiers liked to discuss music, movies, and television, none of which he had even heard of. This was something the other men found strange, though they seemed to understand when Isreal explained that he had grown up Amish. A life, of course, but perhaps easier than telling them he came from a white supremacist cult. His fellow soldiers were eager to show Isreal the ways of the secular world. They got him into rock music, and some of them even brought them along to concerts to see bands like Stone Temple Pilots. He took a particular interest in the subgenre known as nu metal, a type of alternative rock that blends metal and rap. Other soldiers took him to sports games and talked to him about women. Isreal revealed that he was in a relationship with a girl from his hometown, and that they were keeping in contact through letters and the rare visit, but he was always a bit cagey whenever the topic came up. The girl back in Colville was aware that Isreal was in the military, and she was not happy about it. She wanted to move forward with their lives and was displeased that her future would be put on hold now that her boyfriend was in the army. Isreal tried to reassure her, and they stayed together, but their continued relationship was built on lies and withheld information. Though he wrote to her frequently, he never told her anything about what he was doing or his new army buddies. He certainly did not tell her about the scandalous new interests he had developed. The two still talked about getting married. The plan was still for both of them to wait until marriage to lose their virginities to each other. It was something she felt strongly about, and she was led to believe that Isreal felt the same. In reality, Isreal, who used to write in his journal about having sinful thoughts about his girlfriend, could no longer keep his curiosity about the female sex in check and was reportedly seeing prostitutes. Another part of his new life he neglected to mention: he was experimenting with drugs and alcohol. He had tried substances like cocaine and LSD, and though he took them for some time, stopped when he realized he disliked the way they made him feel, as though he was less in control of his own body. Alcohol had a similar effect. People also said that it loosened him up, made him happy drunk, who was more open and easier to talk with. But for whatever reason, he was able to tolerate it enough to the point where he began to show signs of alcoholism. It got so bad that he sometimes blacked out, and in 2001, he even got a DUI while still in the Army. For that, he paid a fine of $350, just over $610 in today's currency. Could the addition of drugs and alcohol intensify his violent urges? Though he never got the chance to kill another person as a soldier, that did not mean that the possibility was not on his mind. He was stationed in Egypt, right by its border with his namesake country Israel for several months, and it appears that he and the other men were less closely observed here. His habit of picking up sex workers became more frequent. Of his time here, two incidents feel particularly notable. The first happened when he and a few friends crossed the border. They were drunk, had gotten a hotel room, and hired a single prostitute. The plan was for Isreal to have a go with her first, but that soon went awry. They were behind closed doors for a short while before the woman ran out, clearly in a panic, and tried her best to flee. Isreal was following closely behind her, similarly frantic. He seemed eager to placate her by giving her cash, but all she wanted was to get away from him. Isreal was not ready to let her go so easily, even with the other men in the room. He stood in front of the door to the room to block her way and moved aside only when she hit him. The other men were baffled and a little disturbed. "What did you do to freak her out so much?" one asked. Isreal shrugged. "I just threw her around a little bit. I wasn't going to let her run the show." Also, while in Israel, he briefly became acquainted with a young foreign exchange student from Norway. He knew nothing about her other than that she was of Turkish descent and seemed interested in him. After some flirting, she gave him the location of her dorm, and he went to see her. Their meeting, unfortunately, quickly went south. "I wouldn't say that was like an outright rape," he later defended himself, "because we were hanging out and stuff, and I did lose control a little bit as things progressed. That's when I realized that if I was going to do that kind of stuff, that it had to be just complete strangers from then on." Isreal would always speak of his crimes this way: aloof, detached, sometimes even laughing at his own recollections. The only real insight he would often provide had to do with his own mistakes, the thought process that led him to becoming a more effective killer. He had a tendency to be rather flippant when talking about all the gruesome things he had done, as though he did not understand what he had done was wrong, or he simply did not care. Other than the DUI, there are no records that indicate Isreal ever got into any serious trouble while in the army. This is not to say that others did not have their suspicions about him. While Isreal had learned how to make friends and developed a facade of normalcy, he still came off, to some, as being just plain weird. One such person was a friend of Isreal, a fellow soldier identified as McGuire. The two men shared a barracks while they were stationed in Egypt, and they got along well. In fact, it was said that the men got along so well that others teased them by calling them a gay couple. At one point, Isreal had even convinced the other man to brand a pentagram on his skin using a heated metal coat hanger. Isreal never got as close with any of the other soldiers, but despite their bond, McGuire could never shake the feeling that there was something off about his new friend. He always had the sense that Isreal was dangerous, but could not place why. Then, one day, he unintentionally said something that offended Isreal. Isreal looked at him coldly and simply said, "I want to kill you, McGuire." Still, he was the only person Isreal could be himself with at this time. Allegedly, they shared an interest in crime. Like Isreal, McGuire had an interest in illegal activities, and the two of them bonded over potential crimes they wanted to commit in the future. Isreal had big plans. The first involved bank robberies. He had claimed to have robbed banks as a teenager, and while no such crime has been matched to him to this day, he appeared confident in his ability to not only carry out such a robbery, but several in succession. The trick was to stick to a strict schedule at a specific location. Isolated, rural areas had less resources to investigate crime. Once he mastered that, Isreal fantasized about kidnapping lots of people and holding them hostage for ransom. How many people exactly? Isreal did not specify, aside from saying he wanted to do it on a mass scale. How he wanted to carry out so many kidnappings are also unclear. The one part of the plan that he was forthcoming about was the ransom. There would have to be a reasonable amount of money that people could actually come up with. The caveat? It would not matter if he got the money or not. Nobody would be getting away from him alive. His victims could easily rat him out if he allowed that to happen. It was a messy plot, something almost silly. But it showed that the urge to hurt others was present in Isreal, and this was only what he had been willing to share with others. What sort of crimes had he been thinking of in secret? 8. 2 women. It was in late 2000 when Isreal would meet the woman who would change his life forever. At the time, he was still in the army, still seeing prostitutes, and most importantly, was still in a long-distance relationship with the girl from Colville. That October, he had even put a down payment on an engagement ring. His girlfriend, now 19 years old, gladly accepted. Unfortunately, their happiness would only last a few months. Isreal was growing bored. He decided to try out something new, the world of chatline dating. He signed up for a service that involved recording voice messages as a greeting for any potential dates. The process was slightly complicated. A woman responded to his personal ad, and he tried to respond with a new message. In doing so, he inadvertently recorded over his original greeting. Anyone else interested would be faced with the awkward situation of hearing him trying to talk to another woman. This is exactly what happened with Tammy Hawkins in December 2000. Tammy, spelled Tammy by some sources, had been reading the local newspaper and came across an advertisement for the same dating service. It was not something that she found very promising, but still, she signed up on a whim. She was bored, unemployed, and figured this was a novel way to pass the time. That was when she came across Isreal's message. If it had not been for his mistake, Tammy would have likely skipped over him without a second thought. There would have been no reason not to, she figured, because it was clear that they were both looking for very different things. Isreal was 21 years old and mentioned that he was looking for a white woman from 18 to 25, who also lived in the Colville area. Tammy was 30 years old, mixed race, half black and half Native American, living in Tacoma, Washington. There was nothing about her that would seemingly appeal to this stranger. Still, Tammy felt compelled to call him, even if it was just to tell him that he needed to fix his message. She was not expecting much, so she was quite surprised when he got back to her rather quickly, asking if she was interested in chatting. Well, she thought, it couldn't hurt to try. So she did. He introduced himself to her as Iz or Izzy, an army guy who had just gotten back from Egypt and was now stationed at Fort Lewis, putting him closer to her than she had realized. When Tammy told him about herself, his interest did not seem to waver, and the conversation she thought would fizzle out before long soon stretched to 5 hours. Iz turned out to be an easy person to talk to. The conversation moved along effortlessly as they discovered some common ground. He admitted that his buddies had urged him to sign up for the chatline service, and like her, he hadn't had very high expectations, but he enjoyed speaking with Tammy and asked if she wanted to meet up for drinks. She readily agreed. By the time they finished, it was around 4 in the morning. They met up 2 days later at a Mexican restaurant called Montezuma's around early afternoon. Though she had chosen that restaurant because it was close to home and felt safe, Tammy could not help but still feel a little nervous. Since the chat line service was all over the phone, she had no idea what Is actually looked like. She could not help but feel the slightest twinge of disappointment when he showed up. He was young-looking, tall, lanky, and not particularly handsome. He had dark brown, slightly wavy hair and an enormous nose. It did not help that he was wearing blocky wire-rimmed glasses that made him look a bit like a dork, either. Tammy did not initially find him attractive, but she had anticipated that. Ishe stayed, however, because she found him interesting, and as the date went on, she found herself liking him more and more. There was a definite sense of chemistry between them. After their drinks, they had lunch together, went for a long drive, and then shared dinner and a movie. The night came to an end before they knew it. They saw each other off with a kiss, and sparks flew. Is had also enjoyed himself. Tammy was a good-looking, curvaceous woman. He liked that Tammy was mature and established, and though she confessed that she had recently lost her job at a Ford dealership, it did not appear to have daunted her. Her childhood had toughened her up, much like Is's had done to him. Tammy was an Oakland, California native. She was born in 1969 to a 19-year-old Native American mother and an older African-American father. Her parents had remained unmarried until she was 3 years old, only to separate after a year. Her father, who had been raised an orphan, appeared unready for the pressure of raising a child, and thus was in and out of her life. He was also openly unfaithful. Her mother, so young when she had her, struggled with alcoholism. She, like many other members of the Makah Indian tribe of Nia Bay, Washington, where she was from, lived below the federal poverty line. The family had to live in unfit housing with no running water or electricity. She was also struck by another thing that so often plagued their community: alcoholism. As a result, Tammy and her younger siblings had to endure a tumultuous upbringing, marked by numerous stays in foster homes. One of the worst things happened when Tammy was only 10 years old. She had to watch her mother get raped and beaten right before her eyes. It was the kind of life that would have worn anyone weary. But Tammy always tried her hardest to look on the bright side. Her unstable childhood was still full of memories of games and sports played with friends. In school, she got good grades, was involved in sports, yearbook, and even the student government. Sadly, the stress of life caught up with her. Her grades began to slip, and at 16, she was already attending Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. It was no wonder why Isreal felt they could relate to each other. After all, he had grown up in less than desirable living conditions, though his family's poverty had been intentional on his parents' part. They were both also older siblings who'd had to do more than their fair share of caring for their brothers and sisters. It was the kind of life that would have worn anyone weary. But Tammy always tried her hardest to look on the bright side. Her unstable childhood was still full of memories of games and sports played with friends. In school, she got good grades, was involved in sports, yearbook, and even the student government. Sadly, the stress of life caught up with her. Her grades began to slip, and at 16 she then, add in the fact that he and Tammy turned out to have very similar tastes in music, movies, and books. It was as though there was no end to what they could talk about. It made sense to Is to try and see her again. When he called her the next day, she invited him to come over to her place. He arrived with a pack of beer, and they spent the night together. From this point on, the two became inseparable. Tammy was happy. The short time they had spent in each other's company was full of passion and tenderness. Who would have imagined that contacting some young soldier on a whim would have led to developing such a connection with a great lover? It was almost too good to be true. Moving on. Tammy got the shock of life just 8 weeks after meeting Is. All that passion they had shared had caught up with them. In February 2001, she realized she was pregnant. How was she supposed to tell him he was going to be a father? He was so young, 10 years her junior. His life had practically just started. Was he ready to be responsible for another one? There was no way, she thought, because army boys like him were only ever after flings. She dreaded having to tell him the news. She called him while he was stationed in Fort Lewis. For some reason, Is did not seem surprised, but he was not exactly thrilled either. "I think you should get an abortion," he told her plainly. Could she have expected anything different? Still, it stung. Things had been going so well with Is. He made her feel safe, secure, and happier than she had been in a long time. She hoped the relationship could continue, even despite the news, but he sounded so sure about what he wanted her to do. Getting an abortion, however, was out of the question. Tammy already had a child, an 8-year-old son named Keaton, and despite the hardships of being a single parent, she loved being a mother. Is had already met Keaton, and the two got along quite well. She thought Is could have made a good father to their unborn baby, but it looked like that just was not in the cards for them. "I'm going to have it," she replied. "So just forget about me. Move on with your life." Meanwhile, in Fort Lewis, Isreal was spending time with his long-distance girlfriend he recently made his fiancée. Neither woman knew about the other, but the younger one had a feeling that something was terribly wrong. Isreal had never been particularly open about his deeper feelings, but now he was pulling away, shutting her out. It was almost as though he did not actually want her there at all. Her suspicions grew upon seeing how secretive he had become. Sure, he had always kept his army talk to a minimum, but now he made it clear that he did not want her. Meeting his new friends in general, he would not tell her about the kinds of things he got up to during his downtime. The change was understandably upsetting for her, as she had come to believe that she had known him well. He could trust her, couldn't he? Was he off at training? Maybe he just needed time. Maybe that was why he would go so long without calling her. Days turned to weeks without so much as a word from him. The girl became worried and tried contacting his higher-ups, but they only told her that there was not anything official preventing him from contacting her. So then why wasn't he making the effort anymore? Then he would suddenly change his tune, start calling her all the time as if he was trying to make up for it. But she was not buying it. But why didn't he have the decency to break up with her? Technically, they were still engaged. The wedding was supposed to take place sometime in the later part of that summer. It was not until May that he finally called to give her some answers. He had become depressed, he admitted, and he no longer had the same relationship with God that he had when he and the girl first got together. Her family would be unlikely to approve of her marrying an atheist, much less would she herself. Then he told her that he already lost his virginity to another woman. Surprisingly, the girl appeared to be more upset about Isreal's lack of faith than his infidelity. Still, he made sure not to tell the girl about him becoming a father. With that, the years-long relationship came to an end. In the aftermath of the breakup, he became listless and depressed. Sure, it was a relief to no longer pretend to be someone he used to be, but what young person doesn't struggle getting over their first relationship? For a while, he became withdrawn, hardly speaking to friends or family. He passed the time by watching horror movies and reading books about serial killers. It was not only the gruesome details of the crimes themselves that interested him, but the lives of and psychology behind the killers as well. Is was fascinated by American serial killer Ted Bundy, who, with a victim count believed to be well over 30, is one of the most notorious criminals in history. He would later go on to say that he saw himself in Bundy. Also among Is's reading material were books on FBI interrogation techniques. Though it is possible that he initially studied this simply due to a morbid interest in the topic, one cannot help but wonder if he knew this knowledge would serve him eventually. When he was not reading, he could not stop thinking about the other woman. They had their fun, and now there was something much different on the horizon. Now he was free to build a life with Tammy. It had been a tough decision, but he had given it a lot of thought while he was away. He thought back to his childhood and all he had done for his siblings, having practically been their third parent, and suddenly fatherhood no longer seemed so daunting. The memories of all the suffering he had been forced to endure filled him with a desire to correct his parents' mistakes. Raising a child in a happy, secure, and secular environment was just another way to get back at his parents. Starting a family could also provide an excellent cover for certain activities. It was the middle of summer when he received an honorable discharge from the military and moved in with Tammy. Perhaps spurred by the loss of her job, she and her son decided to leave Tacoma and headed back to the Maca Reservation in Nia Bay, Washington, with Iz in tow. As a white man with no previous connection to the tribe, Iz was about as much an outsider as one could be, but Tammy's positive reputation soon helped him find his place when her connections got him a job in the reservation's Parks and Recreations Department. He worked 40-hour weeks cleaning up the area and building new features for a pay of $13 an hour, decent money. Their living situation did not look promising. At first, the three moved into a run-down 3-bedroom house reminiscent of the unhappy homes Tammy grew up in. It was extremely fortunate that Iz was so good at building and fixing things. The decrepit house became their home in no time. They should have been happy, and for a time, they were. Slowly, however, Iz's troubles became more apparent. "I have a black heart," he confessed. "I'm a bad person." It made Tammy wish that he wouldn't drink so much. Alcohol would always put him in a mood. But there was something deeper there, she realized. Iz was deeply unhappy and angry at the whole world. He simultaneously thought little of himself, while also seeing himself as better than most people. Tammy became sure of it whenever he spoke about his upbringing. Once, while they watched TV together, he admitted that he had grown up alongside the white supremacist Kehoe brothers. Tammy was horrified. He did not admit to his mixed-race girlfriend that he had been friends with the brothers. When she finally spoke to Heidi for the first time over the phone, she was stunned at how intense Iz's mother came off. Sure, she had expected Heidi to be judgmental, but the older woman was downright creepy, every word dripping with religious fervor. If this was the kind of mother Iz had grown up with, then it was no wonder why he turned out the way he did. Tammy tried her best to remain positive as her pregnancy progressed. She had gotten a job working for the tribe's early childhood development department. It was a job that required lots of overtime, as well as regular traveling every few months. During these trips, Iz stayed at home while Keaton split his time between their home and his biological father's. The time that Iz spent alone here would eventually become a point of interest to police. For now, however, Iz appeared to have become an upstanding member of the community. The people who were wary of him as an outsider grew to like and respect him. His carpentry work was top-notch. He summarized his duties on his construction company's now-defunct website, built many trails, recreational buildings, and assisted the Public Works Department in times of need or emergency situations. Coordinated the purchase, maintenance, and operation of machinery and equipment, including a pump truck and portable, as well as permanent toilet facilities. Nia Bay is a very small village, and my position with the tribe and the projects I completed for them gave me an excellent reputation with the locals. This allowed me a unique opportunity to do a wide variety of construction projects for many customers on weekends. Even Keaton's biological father, Tammy's ex, was approving of Iz, describing him as his favorite of Tammy's boyfriends. Iz was sensitive and understanding when it came to the boy, and never made him feel excluded from the family he and Tammy were building. By all accounts, Keaton's father was a present and engaged parent. Iz simply became the boy's additional paternal figure. Iz even regularly took Keaton on long road trips several hours away to visit his father in Moses Lake, Washington, though he did have a habit of disappearing for a few days after drop-offs. It was shaping up to be a good and wholesome life in Nia Bay, surrounded by friends and new, more accepting family members. No one had any idea it was also a double one. Thank you for your interest in 12 Gauge Investigative. Tune in tomorrow for the next chapter as we go on the journey to learn more about Isreal Keyes, the nomadic devil. Like, subscribe, and share.